Hi, so in this video we're going to look at the equivalent of contacts while note held, I think that's what it's called, or while key press, something like that. It's basically how to do stuff while a key is held down and then stop doing it when you release the key. So let's get into this. So I've made a simple instrument. We've got one sample in here. This one I was actually using for another project. It's just a tapping sample. And there's nothing in the script yet. What we're going to do is we're going to add in our script a thing that says while the key is held down, it's going to just repeatedly play this note. So it'll tap like that as long as the key is held, and then once you release the key, it will stop doing that. But in Kontakt, the way you do it is using a wait statement, and there's no such thing as a wait in HISE. Everything just keeps going and going. So what you have to do is use a timer. So there are two ways of creating timers in HISE. If we go to the API and type in timer, there's the Synth Timer, which is the built-in Synth Timer callback, and this takes a value in seconds, so you can say have a 2-second timer or whatever. And then there's the engine timers, which take a value in milliseconds, and that's what we're going to be using. And they're probably what you'll use most of the time when you're working with timers. So we're going to create a timer first of all. So we'll just create a variable, call it timer, and it's going to equal engine.create timer object. And the timer takes a callback called a timer callback. And this basically tells the timer what to do when the timer is triggered. So we'll say timer.set timer callback, and then in here we have to put a function, and then we're going to do stuff with the timer in here. So with a timer, it's basically like, you can think of it like a loop, except it triggers based on a time interval. So whereas a loop just runs around continuously and counts up to whatever the limit of the loop is, a timer will just go forever until you stop it at a set interval. And we can set that interval with this type of timer in milliseconds. So we could say every 50 milliseconds run the timer. So it'll do the action every 50 milliseconds. Now with our particular timer, we're going to designate a key that's held down by the user. And when that key is held down, it's going to trigger the timer. And when the key is lifted, it's going to stop the timer. So let's just make a constant, and we'll call it trigger key. And our trigger key is going to be 60, which is the same as middle C or C3. And then in our onNote callback, we're going to check if that key has been pressed. So we'll say if message.getNoteNumber is our trigger key, then we're going to start the timer. So it's timer.startTimer. And inside here, we have to put in the time interval, so how fast we want it to trigger. So I'm going to put in 500 milliseconds, so that's half a second. That means this callback will trigger every 500 milliseconds. Now what do we want this timer to do? Well, we're going to have it triggering this note repeatedly, so C3. So in our timer callback, we're going to have synth.playNote C3, which is 60, and we'll play it at a velocity of 60. The velocity doesn't matter in this case. And then we also have to make it stop the timer when we release the key. So what we're going to do in here is put a check. We're going to say if, and we're going to use the command synth.isKeyDown, and then the trigger key. And if that's false, so if it equals 0, we're going to stop the timer, and to do that we're going to put timer.stopTimer. I think actually we can also put this.stopTimer because we're in the timer callback. I think that should work as well. And instead of having equals 0, what we can do is just at the beginning of this, we can just put an exclamation mark. It's a little tidier. Okay, now that should work. One last thing we need to do is we need to ignore the incoming note number, because we don't want it to trigger the sample when you press the note. We only want it to be triggered by the timer. So we'll just put a little thing in here, message.ignore event true. And if we wanted to, we could actually include it inside this if statement, but for this example, it's fine like this. So I'll hit F5, hopefully we won't get any errors. And let's see if it works. So I'm going to hold down middle C. And now I'm going to release it. There we go. So that worked just fine. Now release it. So this is a really simple example. Obviously you can use this for much more elaborate things, but basic example of the timer. The really important thing is somewhere in your system for running your timer is you must stop the timer at some point. You don't want it to just run forever, because that can cause all sorts of other issues. I mean, I guess if you were making a game or something, you could have it running forever, or if you wanted an animation that just plays continuously, you could. But those are using up your CPU cycles, so think carefully before you do that kind of thing. The other limit is the timer can only go down to, I think it's 40 milliseconds is the fastest. So if I put in 30 milliseconds here, and I try and run the timer, I'm going to hit middle C, we should get an error message. Oh, we don't. That's interesting. Let's try it faster. Ah, there we go. So 10 milliseconds it doesn't like. Let's try 20. Fine with 20 milliseconds. Okay, so try 19. It's fine with 19. So 10 milliseconds seems to be the limit, actually. You can't go lower than 11 milliseconds, which I think is going to be fine for most applications. Hopefully this has been useful to you. If you want more specific examples of how you can use this technique, please get in touch and let me know. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, please click subscribe, and there's also my link to my Patreon page in the video description if you'd like to support me there and get access to a few exclusive things and early access to videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.